There are no names in the House of Wisdom, only obedience. He was brought to us as a boy, no more than 12 summers, filthy, sun-blackened, lips cracked from desert thirst. A child of the western trade road, found half dead beneath a fig tree whose roots had grown twisted with rusted iron. He had nothing but a sliver of copper around his neck, engraved with the seal even I did not recognize. The masters took him in silence. He was not asked his name. That too would have been taken, burned away in the sacred fire of forgetting. For names are shackles, and an alchemist must walk unbound if he is to know the divine bonds that tie the world together. He became aspirant, one of 77. For 7 years the boy did not leave the high walls of the inner house. He studied beneath the smoke-stained frescoes of the Dome of Thought, where the symbols of Solomon and the stars burned gold upon lapis blue. He learned the 27 temperaments of brass and the one that speaks. He tasted mercury and did not die. He traced every sand rune of the iron-bound Bait al-Natariya, the Book of Watchfulness, until his fingers bled. He learned to bow, to fast for 13 days beneath the sun until his shadow vanished, to speak with silence, and to write without ink. He knelt before the Codex of Salt and memorized each of its 3,000 refrains, inscribed not in words but changes of hue upon a single sheet of pure calcite. Others broke. Of the 77, only 8 remained by the end of the 5th year. One clawed out his own eyes after reading the open verse of sulfur inversion. Another drank deep of the forbidden alum and sang joyously until his flesh split and gave way to steam. Yet the boy did not falter. He did not beg. Not once did he question the masters. He learned the sacred silence. And when, on the 7th year, the crescent moon bled bronze and the call to the hour of judgment echoed from the minaret of the southern bastion, the aspirant was summoned. Not by name, but by presence. The door to the high alchemagi was opened before him, carved from solid orichalcum and set with the seals of Solomon, 9-fold and thrice reversed. It had no hinges, no handle. It simply opened as if exhaling from a dream. He stepped inside. It was said that none who beheld the high alchemagi ever saw their true form. They stood in the dark, like statues, shrouded in their own armor, robes veiling the holy inscriptions carved into the very plates of their skin. Behind them, great braziers burned with cold flame, alchemical light so pure it cast no shadows. The aspirant knelt. They did not speak with tongues. They spoke through the echo chamber, a device older than the house itself, said to be crafted by Idris the Watcher, first of the grand transmuters. "You have completed the first circle," the chamber intoned, each syllable resonating with the force of struck iron. "You shall now attempt the first trial, Takwin al-Kalb, the forging of the alchemist's heart." At first, the boy did not understand, until the first of the high alchemagi raised a hand and from the folds of his robe produced a page, thin as air, made of hammered gold. Upon it, the blueprints of armor, not just steel, not merely brass, but something deeper, a second skin, a vessel of will. Etched with the seals of Solomon, each glyph capable of commanding the building blocks of matter itself. Such armor was not merely worn. It was bound to the blood, to the soul, to the third eye yet unopened. The echo spoke again. "You must forge this with your own hands, not from metal alone, but from sacrifice. It must bear 7 elements, each tempered in the crucible of remembrance. The armor must know who you were and reject it. Only then may it become your second form." A final instruction was given, though none would call it merciful. "There will be no going back from here. From this moment on, you will succeed or you will perish. And so the first trial began. The chamber of the crucible was buried beneath 40 steps of basalt, its walls slick with condensed vapor from the steam wells of the old city buried far beneath Jabir. It was older than the House of Wisdom itself. The aspirant descended barefoot, each step engraved with one of the divine names. None were to be spoken aloud. Only 3 lamps were permitted within the chamber. Their flames were not natural, but fueled by the black oil distilled from the bones of desert martyrs, drawn from catacombs where no prayers reached. It cast no warmth, only clarity. There in the heart of the crucible stood the forge. Not of bellows and hammer, but of seals and flame, alchemical and unyielding. Its frame was built of the 7 base metals, gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, lead, and mercury, each aligned to one of the heavenly spheres. And beside it, a basin of sacred oil and a bowl of his own blood. To begin, he had to select the 7 elements that would bind to his armor, one for each seal that would anchor it to creation. The wrong combinations would cause the armor to crack. Worse still, it would become possessed with a will not his own. The first seal he chose was iron of the mountain, drawn from the blackened peak of Mount Qasr al-Ruh, where once angels and jinn had warred and left nothing living behind. He climbed the peak in silence, alone. In his hand, he carried only a bone-bladed chisel and a prayer carved into wax. The iron bled sparks when struck. The second seal was sulfur of the dead tongue. It had to be whispered into life, coaxed from the bones of a poet who had starved himself into silence. Buried with his face to the east, the aspirant unearthed his tomb in the Valley of No Names, lips cracked from thirst, the poet's skull still bearing the taste of ash and longing. The third seal was cedar of the firebird, a single splinter, charred and unburned, from the tree beneath which a martyr once exploded into flame from sheer divine ecstasy. It was said the tree grew once every 7 centuries, and only wept sap when it mourned. The aspirant waited 3 days until it did. The 4th was brass of the drowned city. He dove into the flooded cisterns of ancient Madinat al-Bahr, where great statues of forgotten kings lay broken beneath silt. He wrested a gear from a submerged automaton shaped like a lion, still ticking after 500 years of sleep. He did not surface until he bled from the eyes. The 5th seal was glass of the desert's heart, formed not by hand, but by the wrath of the heavens, where lightning kissed the sands and the wind sang hymns through molten tunnels. The aspirant wandered until he found the glass by scent alone, dreaming of thunder until his sandals were stripped from his feet. The 6th seal was salt of the farthest shore, taken from where the ocean met the bones of leviathans. The salt was not white, but stained with ancient blood and fossil memories. There he tasted a whisper from the sea and saw a vision of a woman with no face, warning him, "Do not forget the cost of the 3rd eye." He did not forget. And lastly, the 7th seal, mercury of the moonless night. Not quicksilver, but living essence, harvested from a single drop of lunar ichor that dripped from the obsidian eye of a slain watcher. It had to be captured mid-fall, in a cup shaped from one's own rib. This was the only time he screamed. He returned to the crucible bloodied, barefoot, trembling, but changed. There, with his bowl of blood and his basin of oil, he lit the flame. 7 nights he worked. He bent metal with gloved hands that cracked at the joints. He poured molten brass in spiral molds etched with verses from the Book of Division. He spoke to the flames in tongues long forgotten, and they answered with shape. He whispered the names of the living god into the seals, binding them with wax pressed from sacrificial bees that fed on lotus in graveyards. The armor was not beautiful. It was sacred. It clinked when moved, not like metal, but like bone, glass and oil all agreeing not to shatter. Each piece bore a seal of Solomon, beaten in by hand, cooled in his own sweat, and set beneath the eye of the alchemical moon whose light came from a vent above the crucible, open only once a year. The breastplate bore the largest seal, set in a circular depression over the heart. A 21-pointed star surrounded by 7 rings, each representing a stage of the soul's refinement. On the morning of the 8th day, he stood before the forge, the armor arrayed in pieces around him like the bones of a saint. He anointed it with blood and oil. He spoke the oath of joining, and then he wore it. Not as a warrior wears a cuirass. Number. The armor flowed onto him, each piece locking into the next, not with buckles but with intention. The seals aligned with his veins. The iron kissed his spine. The helm, shaped like a mask without a mouth, sealed itself over his face with a hiss of steam and holy breath. The armor was not heavy. It was watching. He climbed the 40 basalt steps again, each footfall echoing louder than it should. The doors of Orichalcum stood open when he reached the surface. The high Alchemagi waited in silence. The echo chamber spoke again. You have completed the first trial. The aspirant knelt. The second awaits. Takwin al-Kadim, the making of the servant. 40 days you shall labor. 40 days you shall sleep not in the light. 40 days you shall not speak your own name, not even in thought. Your servant shall rise from the sphere if your soul is worthy. If not, it shall enter your body, and you shall be worn. There was no farewell, only silence. He turned and walked deeper into the house. The chamber was sealed behind 7 locks, each one opened only by the will of the armor he now bore. None may enter the hall of generation save those clad in the sealed skin, for the vapors within were death to all else. Not merely poison, but transformation. A breath here without divine protection would twist lungs into bellows, eyes into kaleidoscopes, thoughts into oil-slick spirals. In the center of the room rested the sphere. Golden, flawless, suspended in the air by chains of smoke. It turned slowly on its axis without touch, humming with the language of numbers too sacred for human mouths. Carved into its surface were the 66 formulas of divine Takwin, encoded not in script, but in alchemical geometry, sacred lines that bent space as they curved. It was from this sphere the homunculus would be born, or from it, death would slither. The aspirant began his second trial on the first moonless night of spring. A bowl of salt, a phial of blood, a tooth wrapped in parchment. The ingredients of life, but not true life. This was crafted life, obedient, intelligent, and loyal, or monstrous. He remembered the warnings. Failed the timing, and it would boil into hatred. Failed the tempering, and it would scream at the face of God. Failed the breath, and it would crawl into his mouth while he slept, and wear him like skin. The room was equipped with only 3 devices. The sabbatic clock, whose hands pointed not to hours, but to the arrangement of the stars above Alamut. The womb kiln, whose bellows were powered by hymns etched in platinum coils and heated by the sacred fire of the crucible. The distillation cruciform, an array of tubes, coils, and polished glass lungs through which flowed the breath of the aspirant, filtered and sanctified. All else must be made by hand. He began with the shell, not of bone nor clay, but of quintessence fused into a trembling gel. This he shaped into the rough form of a child. Small, squat, not quite human. Its surface was translucent, its organs visible in spectral echo, but none yet lived. It was a vessel, no more alive than a jar. He mixed his own blood with the dust of 4 winds, stirred with a rod of magnetized silver, etched with the 42nd name of God. The mixture glowed blue when correct, and it did. He poured the blood into the shell's veins. Then he prepared the lungs, woven from alchemical silk, gathered from spiders who fed only on myrrh. He wove them under a black veil, singing the 4 verses of binding in the voice of a woman long dead. When he finished, he placed the lungs into the creature's chest. The sphere began to spin faster. This was a sign. On the 9th day, he made the nerve core, drawn from silver dust soaked in tears, his own, collected from fasting beneath the oil lamps of the dome. The nerve core was carved into a filigree orb, placed in the skull like a 3rd eye. This, he knew, was where the creature's thought would dwell. But now came the breath. The aspirant knelt, he placed his lips against the vessels and exhaled. Not just air, but will. He chanted in thought. He surrendered every image of self, every remembered scar and joy, into that breath. The fog of his soul spilled into the vessel's mouth. The homunculus quivered. The sphere turned faster. On the 25th day, disaster. He misjudged the temperature of the hum kiln by a fraction, less than a degree. The gelatinous skin of the creature began to warp. Its arms twisted backwards. The gel bubbled with voices, eyes opened beneath its skin. He snatched the psalter of reversal, tore it open, and shouted a name so sacred his voice bled. The eyes closed. The arms stilled. He wept, but he did not sleep. On the 37th day, the sphere opened. A seam split down its center, and a glow spilled forth like starlight poured into honey. The chains of smoke vanished, the chamber silenced. The aspirant placed the creature inside the sphere, curled like an unborn child. He sealed the halves, whispered the last incantation. Then he waited. 3 days. On the 3rd day, the sphere cracked like an egg. Out came the servant. It stood no taller than a child of 10 years, yet its limbs were too long, its hands too graceful. Its flesh shimmered, neither liquid nor solid. 2 eyes blinked at him, pale and luminous. No mouth, no nose. It bowed, and then it spoke, not aloud but directly into the mind, a voice like dripping water into hot oil. "Command me, Maker." The aspirant fell to his knees. It had worked. The servant, his taquin, extended a hand. The touch was cool, but not unpleasant. It felt as if thought itself had reached out. It had no name, but it obeyed. He emerged from the chamber of the sphere on the 41st day. His armor clinked with resonance. The servant followed silently, occasionally shimmering to pass through doorways, occasionally melting into a puddle of silver, to a forehead curious eyes. The body Alchemist awaited. The echo chamber spoke. "You have passed the 2nd trial. One remains, the final, the true period. Open your 3rd eye." And see. The aspirant did not ask what this meant. He had seen the failures. He had heard their screams, echoing from the cellars of the unseen. Those who had awakened their eye and could not close it. Those whose minds had shattered at the sudden vision of atoms in prayer, of sin written in the spaces between words, of time weeping backward. Some begged to die. Some had to be sealed in lead-lined tombs. Others were kept. No one said why. He stood in the circle of revelation, marked with the 27-pointed star of Idris the Enlightened. His servant stood beside him, gently shifting its mass in preparation. In his left hand, the sigil of ascent, drawn from meteoric iron, cooled in his own tears. In his right, the ink of divine light, distilled from the resin of the wailing tree, lit by the moonless fire. He was instructed only thus: speak no word, feel no thought, surrender your last veil, and open. In the deepest sanctum of the House of Wisdom, beneath obsidian domes that never reflected light, stood the Chamber of Sight. It had no windows, no doors. It was not entered by walking, but by submission. The aspirant stood at the edge of the seal of Idris. 27 points, 9 circles, threefold symmetry, the diagram of divine proportion said to mirror the eye of God when he gazes into creation. He removed his armor, piece by piece. The seals clung to him reluctantly, like flesh resisting flaying. He bled from the shoulders, the spine, the temple. This was proper. Pain was remembrance, and only remembrance could guide the final veil. Naked and trembling, he stepped into the circle. His servant followed, whispering prayers not in words but in breath, tracing invisible symbols with fingers that shimmered and changed shape mid-gesture. The circle began to hum. The trial of the third eye was the only trial that no master could observe. It was said that even the high alchemagi, those whose gaze could bend fire and command gold to dance, were forbidden from watching what the aspirant would see. It was between him and God, or perhaps between him and something older. The servant presented the ink of divine light, drawn from a tree that only grew in lands where angels had died. It was luminous, shifting between silver and red, thick with memory. With this ink, the aspirant marked a single line across his forehead, just above the brow, no wider than a breath, no longer than a name. Then he lay upon the floor. He closed his 2 eyes and opened the third. Pain, not burning, not stabbing, peeling, as though the world had been a painting all along, and now the canvas was torn. Sound vanished. The air froze. The room ceased to exist. He was standing not in stone, but in a sea of moving color, endless and roaring. The third eye did not see as the others did. It saw the truth beneath shape. He beheld atoms praying in circles. He saw breath take form and become light. He saw fire and salt embracing like long-lost kin. He saw blood writing scripture into the bones. And then he saw them, the architects, not men, not angels, not demons. They stood outside the veil of form, tall, faceless, robed in the numbers that shape reality. Each carried a rod, a scroll, and a chain. They moved not through space but through intention. Where they looked, matter obeyed. One turned toward him, and he understood. You are not ready. His eye flared. He screamed. Back in the circle, the servant convulsed. Its limbs writhed, liquefied, coalesced again. It reached for him, but could not touch. The eye forbade it. Visions came now not in images, but meanings. He saw the first alchemist, Jabir al-Hakim, splitting stone into song and turning breath into diamonds. He saw the high alchemagi burning themselves alive to sanctify their armor, their screams reshaped into the sacred seals. He saw the birth of the House of Wisdom, built not by hand but by agreement. And he saw the failures. Men with eyes so large they consumed their skulls. mouths shrieking equations no one should hear, crawling backward through corridors, begging the floor to forgive them. One stared at him from a cage of lead. "Close it!" the madman begged. "Close it!" The aspirant did not. He endured. The architects approached again, but this time he did not flee. He knelt and offered his eye. They placed the scroll upon his brow, unrolled it. Its words were not words, they were laws. Gravity, heat, time, decay, faith, all inked in a spiral without end. They lifted their rods and branded him, not with fire, but with understanding. When he awoke, 3 days had passed. His servant lay beside him, humming a lullaby in a language he had never taught. His 2 eyes were unchanged, but upon his forehead the skin now bore a third, small, vertical, sealed by silver lashes that would open only when called. He saw not with it. He knew he stood. The circle dimmed. The stone opened, and the echo chamber awaited. "You have passed the final trial. You are Alchemist. You are Jabirean." He was given back his armor. It slid onto his form like second birth. The seals shone. The brass pulsed. The joints moved before he commanded them. The servant stood to his left. To his right a sword, untouched, unsharpened, for he no longer needed one. Thus did the nameless aspirant become the 7th amongst his peers to become an alchemist. He passed all 3 trials. He opened the eye, he forged the servant, he bore the seals, and now he was ready to leave the house to serve the Sultan, to bring death to the enemies of the believers with weapons made from sand, fire, and divine breath. He was sent east next, across the salt flats of Zar al-Bahr, where the wind howled day and night, and even the carrion birds flew with caution. The faithful called it as-Sahra al-Mayita, the dead desert, though it had not always been so. Once it had been fertile, before the heretics came, before they broke open the earth and bled it dry. The alchemist traveled on foot, his servant gliding beside him, sometimes vanishing beneath the sands like a whisper lost to time. The sun did not touch him. His armor exhaled cool mist, laced with Iron Sultanate sigils that dispersed the heat. The seals of Solomon etched into his backplate shimmered in the glare, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. He found the war front after 5 days. He knew it not by walls or trenches, but by the bones. An entire battalion of the Sultan's best had been devoured, some by flame, others by alchemical poison. The sand was green with corrosion. Bodies lay peeled, turned inside out, their prayer still etched on their tongues. He walked among them in silence. Then he began to work. The heretics were not far. Their machines crawled like insects across the dunes, black, angular, breathing smoke that curled into blasphemous glyphs. They dragged crucified prisoners behind them as they moved, using their screams to navigate. Each machine bore a different mark, a broken eye, a spiral mouth, a chalice of inverted light, and above all flew the sigil of Asmodai, patron of alchemical inversion, the enemy's twisted reflection. The alchemist reached into his satchel and removed a shard of green glass, still warm from Bahriyeh's battlefield. He held it up. His third eye opened. The glass screamed. It cracked into dust, and from it rose memory. He shaped the sand around him, spoke to the sodium, to the silica, to the memories buried in the bones of the dead. He poured, knowing, into the desert, and the desert obeyed. As the heretics advanced, the dunes changed. They sharpened, turned to glass, mirrors, spires, daggers. Their war engines, blinded by divine reflection, turned against one another. One opened fire on its brother, another marched into a crevasse that had not been there before, until it was. The alchemist walked forward, step by step. And as he walked, the sand beneath his feet turned to light. Then came the beasts, wrought by enemy hands, shaped like scorpions of brass and gristle. They moved with infernal rhythm, their claws steaming with unholy fluid. One lunged, the servant intercepted. It leapt, no, flowed into the machine's joints, liquefying mid-air. It surged into vents and seams, then expanded. With a convulsion, the beast burst, its limbs flailing in reverse. Another struck. The alchemist raised his palm. The seal on his gauntlet pulsed, and the creature stopped. Its metal turned to salt. Its limbs fell apart. Its shriek was silent. By nightfall, the desert was still again, but no longer dead. It was sacred. He planted a single brass rod into the sand, etched with the seal of dominion. It hummed, and from it the dunes pulsed with light once more. Later, when the Sultan's engineers arrived, they found the battlefield remade. Glass towers rose from the earth, each one engraved with a name. Each one sang, and beneath them, silence. The heretics would not return here, not for 1,000 years. In the camp that night, one of the surviving commanders, blind in one eye, his face burned by heretic fire, approached the alchemist. He wept. "You are a curse upon our foes, and a mercy upon us." The alchemist did not answer. He fed a droplet of quicksilver into his servant's chest. It pulsed in gratitude. There are cities that die with fire, others with silence, and some, like Al-Haidara, drown beneath their own reflection. It had once been the jewel of the eastern tributary, a city built on arches and aqueducts, its domes mirrored in the shining waters of the river Marwa. The scholars called it the Pearl of the Undercurrent. Its towers were carved with verses of the Kitab al-Hayawan, the Book of Living Things, and its schools of water alchemy were the envy of every province. But that was before the river turned red, before the dead refused to rot. The alchemist arrived on the 3rd day of the 7th moon. The sky was overcast with ash. The air was thick with the scent of myrrh and stagnant blood. The bridge leading to Al-Haidara had long since collapsed. Now only half-submerged towers jutted from the water like fingers raised in warning. Beneath the surface, something shifted, too fluid to be flesh, too heavy to be spirit. He did not hesitate. He walked into the river. The seals on his armor flared. The water parted, not physically but alchemically. The molecules restructured at his command. Salt shifted. Impurities fled. His servant followed, swimming like quicksilver, filtering toxins as it moved, its limbs forming fins and gills as needed. Together, they descended. The city beneath the river was quiet. Not dead, not asleep. Listening. The buildings were intact, preserved by alchemical currents that had not faded. Lamps still burned in some windows, green and trembling. Script ran along the walls like veins, alive with meaning. It was not the script of the faithful, it was backward. Mirror script, an abomination of Jabirean sanctity, reflecting divine formulas in reverse, distorting the names of God into mouthless symbols. His third eye opened instinctively, and he saw. Every archway was a doorway for something watching. Every lantern was an eye, blinking in rhythm with a heartbeat not his own. At the heart of the city, where the grand bathhouse of wisdom once stood, the water frothed. And from it rose a figure, not human, not homunculus, a shape formed from drowned prayers, stitched with heretical calligraphy and crowned with a halo of flayed faces. It spoke in silence. Return the breath that was stolen. Unwrite what you are. Die unmade. The alchemist raised no weapon. He simply stepped forward. The seals on his gauntlet flickered, 7 of them active now. He pressed his palm to the water, and he remembered the formulas of reversal, the names of undoing, the patterns of righted blasphemy. He did not destroy the entity. He unbound it. He took each symbol that composed it and spoke its mirror truth. He peeled the false calligraphy from its limbs, rewrote the formulas mid-air, transformed its scream into silence. The creature collapsed into syllables, and then into salt, and then into nothing. The water stilled. The mirror script vanished. In its place, true words returned, etched into the stone as if they had never left. His servant bowed, its form briefly flickering into the shape of a kneeling child. And from beneath the ruins, a door opened. A chamber untouched by flood or rot. Within, a vault of sealed tomes. Jabirean texts, lost for 3 centuries, uncorrupted. He emerged from the river at dusk. The villagers on the banks gasped as they saw him rise, his armor wet but untouched, his seals glowing faintly in the light of the setting sun. He carried no gold, only a scroll case chained to his wrist. "The city is sanctified," he said. "Bury its name in prayer. Speak it no more." Later, the Sultan's scribes would copy the recovered tomes by hand, spreading their knowledge to the hidden schools across the eastern borderlands. The alchemist made no request for reward. He merely turned his eyes west again, toward fire, toward judgment, toward war. It was a forbidden place, not by decree of Sultan or scripture, but by silence. A place the faithful did not name, a wound that refused to close. Where the earth had once bloomed with gardens of incense-bearing cedar and myrrh, there now stood twisted trees grown from corpses, roots fed on martyrs' blood, bark made from sun-cured skin. They called it the Garden of Flayed Saints. It was not marked on any map, but the alchemist knew the way. The wind screamed as he crossed the borderlands, each gust filled with the scent of burnt sugar and iron, signs of demonic alchemy. Soil was no longer earth but powdered bone. Stones breathed. Statues of once holy men lined the path, but their faces had been carved away, replaced with blankness or inverted features. Mouths for eyes, tongues where ears had been. His servant recoiled slightly, but still followed. The trees began at the edge of the valley. They did not grow. They waited. Twisted boughs stretched with tendon and cartilage. Fruits hung like fetuses in glass, each one bearing a face mid-scream. The garden whispered. Prayers once holy, now turned inside out, and in the center, a throne, built from spine and nail. Upon it sat the heresiarch. She was once Jabirean. That much was clear in the way she bore herself, in the remnants of script tattooed across her exposed flesh. But her skin was peeled in patterns, flayed to reveal the workings of her own alchemy, veins stitched with wire, her eyes replaced by opals of moving ink. She smiled when he approached. "The Sultan sends a blade," she said, "or a mirror." The alchemist said nothing. He stood in the garden. and opened his third eye. The world twisted, not with pain, but with meaning. He saw the glyphs carved into the heresiarch's bones, each one a corruption of divine principle, each one still true in a terrible way. She had not rejected alchemy. She had pushed it further, past the bounds of doctrine, past mercy. She had created life, cities, beasts, and then consumed them to feed her own rebirth. "Do you see me?" she whispered. "Do you see what you could be? They fear what I know, but you carry the third eye. You know there is more." She extended a hand, and the garden sighed. Every tree trembled, every hanging fruit screamed. "Join me. We could end the war in a season. Rebuild the house without chains, without secrets, without silence." He stepped forward, but not to kneel, to speak. "You have seen the architect's shadow," he said, "but not the architect. You have stolen names, but you do not know them." He raised a finger. The seal of binding glowed. "You opened your eye to power. I opened mine to balance, and you have tipped the scales." He knelt, not to her but to the soil. He pressed his palm to the earth, and unmade the garden. The roots of the trees turned to ash. The soil screamed. The fetid fruits popped one by one, releasing vapor that coiled into the air like ascending ghosts. The throne cracked. The heresiarch rose, fury distorting her form. She threw her arms wide. From her flayed chest a new servant emerged, an abomination of bone and light, stitched with the limbs of failed aspirants. It rushed him. The alchemist raised his arm. His servant surged forward. The two clashed, not in violence, but in alchemical combat. Formula met formula. Sigil clashed with sigil. Their bodies blurred, changing shape, form, mass. One became fire, the other smoke. One became a river, the other salt. Finally, the heretic servant faltered, and the alchemist's creature enveloped it, reclaiming its stolen truths and sealing them within a brass cage. He turned to the heresiarch. She knelt now, coughing black ichor. Her opal eyes cracked. "Kill me," she whispered. "They always do." He looked at her, then at the cage, then into the sky. "No, you will remember. You will carry the weight of what you unbalanced. And serve." He rewrote her, not her mind, not her body, but her name. He spoke it, unmade it, and replaced it. She fell silent. The garden died, and the war shifted. They called it Al-Fulk al-Hadid, the Iron Maw. It was not a fortress, it was not a machine. It was a godless city on treads built by heretic engineers from the bones of 1,000 siege engines, driven by the endless combustion of stolen saints and living prisoners fed into its heart. Taller than any mosque, wider than a caliphate, it moved across the earth like judgment inverted. Its front was a mouth, a cavernous opening filled with rotating teeth of molten steel. It ground cities to ash. Its rear spilled twisted smoke and broken prayers. And it was moving toward the coast. The Sultanate had thrown everything at it. Cannon, fire, faith. None prevailed. The Iron Maw consumed. The ground behind it remained uninhabitable for generations, seared with burning glyphs that howled under moonlight. It did not need to stop. It did not need to rest. Only one option remained. Send the alchemist inside. He was delivered by night, dropped from a glider of pure onyx flown by mute monks who dared not speak a word as they hovered above the Iron Maw's skin. His servant, reduced to a mask and fluid core, clung to his chest plate like a child to its mother. They landed atop a maintenance hatch, slick with machine oil and marrow. He whispered the 47th seal. It opened, and he dropped in. The inside of the maw was alive. Pipes pulsed like arteries. The walls were ribbed in bronze and iron, inscribed with profane equations that writhed when stared at. Screams echoed through vents, punctuated by bursts of steam that stank of blood and bile. He moved in silence. Each step resonated with the armor's harmonics, vibrations that confused the Maw's guardians, cloaking him in a false rhythm. From the shadows, things stirred. Engineers made of wire and gristle. Drones of meat and piston, monks of rust with faces sewn shut and limbs that moved in perfect, hateful sequence. He was not here to kill them. He was here to kill the heart. It lay in the sanctum of motion, a great cathedral engine buried deep within the maw, where all motion was born. Beneath its spinning turbines and sacrificial altars beat the furnace, a churning pit that burned with the souls of the devout. He stood at the threshold. His servant unfurled, the seals on his shoulders ignited. And the eye opened. He saw. The maw was not just machine, it was memory, a composite of countless war devices stitched together by heretic alchemy, fed by fallen faiths. Each of its teeth had once crowned a holy tower. Each of its circuits was wound with stolen scripture. It was a lie, built to convince the world that resistance was pointless. He would not resist. He would invert. He stepped into the furnace. The heat did not consume him. His armor flared with the full alignment of all 9 seals. He whispered the unbinding name, then fed the furnace a vial of golden vapor, the distilled essence of a martyr king's final breath, collected 3 centuries ago and sealed in a stasis ampule. It screamed, not in hate, in recognition. The maw halted. Its gears shuddered. All across its vast, crawling body, alarms sounded, whistles like bone flutes, claxons tuned to broken hymns. The walls twisted, reshaping. The thing knew it had been seen. A tide of flesh machines descended upon the sanctum. But they did not find a man. They found transformation. The alchemist had become light. His seals spun around him like planets, each radiating holy geometry. His servant flowed in loops, forming defense arrays and emitting bursts of stabilizing counterscript. Together, they began to sing, not with mouths, but with maqth. The maw began to die, not with fire, but with memory. Every piece of scripture it had stolen returned to its source. Every inverted prayer unraveled. The bolts that held it together began to doubt. And then, collapse. The iron maw folded inward, not with an explosion, with a fold, like a page turned in reverse. And when the fire cleared, there was nothing, only scorched stone and a single brass scar in the shape of a seal. The alchemist did not return. Not in body, not in voice. Only his servant crawled free, its form flickering, cradling a sealed canister of memory, etched with the alchemist's philanaal thoughts. When opened, it whispered, "I am not gone. I am used. I am transmuted. So let the maw end with me." The desert covered the wound within a week. Where the iron maw folded and vanished, the sands rolled in, slow and patient, erasing detail, smoothing jagged memory. The sun baked it dry. The wind whispered over it without care. There was no monument, no call to prayer, no inscription to mark where he fell. Only the faint shape of a scar in the stone, buried just beneath the surface, like a thought unfinished. Some say he survived. Some say he became part of the Maw itself. Others think he was never there at all, just a weapon fired by the High Alchemist, another tool of the Sultan's endless war machine, burned out and discarded when spent. There was no proof, no bones, no armor, no scroll, only the servant. It emerged from the sands days later, its form reduced to a flickering wisp, barely coherent, no longer shaped like man or child, but a sliver of quicksilver adrift on the dunes. It wandered for days, unresponsive. Then it stopped near a half-buried cairn of stone and salt, folded itself into a still coil, and ceased. It was not recovered. There was no recovery party sent. In the House of Wisdom, the echo chamber remained silent. No trial was delayed, no ceremonies held. New aspirants were chosen that year, 7 of them, cloaked in grey, their faces shrouded. One of them bore the same stillness in the eyes, the same quiet as the boy who had passed before. No one remarked on it. The war continued. The heretic fleets pressed east along the inland delta. A battalion of plague things breached the copper wall of Al-Rihab. Apostate emissaries wandered through the border towns preaching freedom through rot. A new siege engine, smaller but more efficient than the Maw, was reported moving through the salt wastes, and the alchemists were needed again. One fell, another rose. They say the sand in that place still carries a slight shimmer, fine grains that gleam like ground brass under moonlight. No shrine was built, no name etched. When asked, the High Alchemist guy replied, "We lose many. This one was no different." There was no scripture recorded, no legend told, only the faintest impression passed between initiates in muttered phrase. He bore all 3 seals. He passed the trials. He was sent where others would not go. He did not return. In the endless war against the heretic, this is all most can hope for. To be used, to serve, to be forgotten in silence. The balance demands it, and the dessert, as ever, covers what remains.